Hello, beautiful community. Welcome to a chat about 1 year of war. Let's look together and briefly at where we are, where Ukraine is, where the Russians are at, and where this is going. First, Ukraine. Ukraine shocked the world by how well it has stood up to Putin's brutal invasion. One of the most remarkable things has been how the Ukrainian state survived and continued functioning effectively. And one of the most striking aspects of that has been local government. How much regional authorities could deliver for the people and how much they were trusted. Something else that really surprised us was Zelensky, who turned out to be an extraordinary wartime leader. Do not make the mistake that if Ukraine were to win the war tomorrow, that Zelensky would remain popular in Ukraine. That's not how it works. And I think the second thing that's really clear, third thing that's really clear, is that there is a kind of civil war on the ex-Soviet space, where there is an imperialist authoritarian model bumping up against a choice in favor of the modern democratic republic, and Ukraine, wherever you are in that country, has on the whole settled on the idea that it's the democratic republic that makes sense. So Ukraine has clarified itself in that tussle on that space, and it said this is where we stand, and Belarus is behind us and Russia is very far behind us, and to some extent on the opposite side. So it's important that there is this civic identity in Ukraine that transcends ethnicity, language. Ukrainians, wherever they are in the country and whatever their background, have to a very impressive degree come to feel in recent years more than the world noticed, and in some ways more than Ukraine noticed, that they belonged to a single political culture that was definitely not Russia. The second topic I wanted to discuss with you today is painful. And that's that we've got to say something about Ukraine's maximalist goal and Russia's maximalist goal. Ukraine's maximalist goal is clear. Get independence and get its territories back, preferably up until the 1991 border, combined with feeling safe and secure that Russia will not invade again. Now, this is painful because the public mood in Ukraine is quite strong about that being the thing to go for. But is Ukraine simply on course for it as things stand? No. Ukraine is on course for an uncertain year and an uncertain short-term period of more than a year, a few years. How this pans out in great part is going to depend on the sustenance and extent of Western support. We've got a couple of things that are clear. The West's support will ensure for the foreseeable future that Ukraine stands independently. But how far a Ukrainian victory close to its maximalist goals is possible is uncertain. And the current direction we are on is itself uncertain, but we've got to be honest that there is a big chance that this may be the year where, contrary to the current public mood, Ukrainians will be forced painfully to reassess their maximalist goals. Through the sense of being stuck in a war that's not moving fast enough in their favor. There's a real prospect of that. Do not go into this year thinking that Ukraine's about to win and then win more and then win more. That could happen. because war is uncertain. But we've got to be concerned that there's a very, very big chance that on current trends, Ukraine's in for a reevaluation of its maximalist goals. What about Russia's maximalist goals? Russia's maximalist goals are not about taking some or all of Ukraine. I want to be clear about this. Russia's maximalist goals are not about Russia taking some or all of Ukraine. It's about using Ukraine as a tool to bring about change in the behavior of major Western powers. All of the Ukrainian children and women who have died or fled, all the Ukrainian men who are fighting, everybody who has had to endure this catastrophe in Ukraine is for Mr. Putin a tool to achieve two aspirations: regime security at home, consolidating society, and shaking up and disordering the international order. Yes, Mr. Putin has a bit of a fetish about Ukraine as a tool, but for him, all of the suffering that you have seen with your eyes, and if you're not in Ukraine, you've seen it on the television screens, on your tablets, on your phones, on your computers. That's just a tool to disorder the international order. Let's be clear about that. And the next topic is peace. And it's because of what we've just said about the Kremlin's goals that a peace deal now, a peace deal today, is a way of giving Mr. Putin the advantage in the war tomorrow. It's very often an honorable and honest lack of understanding of Kremlin intent that leads many commentators to say this is a ghastly war. How can we possibly bring it to a close with some kind of peace deal as soon as possible? That doesn't mean that there won't be a painful peace deal in the future, but it means that a peace deal today, right, is a head start for Mr. Putin in the war tomorrow. Mr. Putin has married this war. His regime has married this war. This war does not end, even though fighting might stop at a certain point, until Putin's regime goes away. That is misunderstood by many commentators who are proposing a peace deal. That's where the error essentially lies in, right? Misunderstanding of Kremlin intentionality. A quick side comment about the kind of destructive borderlessness of the Putin regime. Even though Putin has a fetish about Ukraine, and this is a word I'm borrowing from somebody, Alexander Etkind, the wonderful Russian academic, I think on the whole, Putin doesn't think that Ukraine is a thing. And that's because Putin, if you look at his regime security and national security goals, securing power at home, disordering the international order, not that it was that ordered before, but Putin wants to propel Russia from the back row to the front. That's predicated on the fact that borders are always moving and they're always fluid, and you always got to keep pushing them out. That is also part of that whole marriage arrangement that we've talked about how the regime has married the war. This borderless story is part of a psychology that ain't going to go away until this regime goes away. Right? So on certain terms, a peace deal for that kind of regime is an incoherent proposal. In other words, it's a misrepresentation of the borderlessness of the world as yielded by the true interests of major powers. Radical opposition to Putin. Quite simply, this flank that has not that much support in the population now, which is fortunate. We've seen just in the last few days this event in the stadium, right, where people were paid very small amount of money to be there. They didn't want to be there. We're seeing a real cap on the fascization of society, even though the regime is trying to push it further. Not all the way. It's not trying to push it all the way. It's trying to push it further. Yeah, by getting in an ugly way involved, particularly in the education of young children, with their propaganda about how Mr. Putin is taking on the half of the world that's all gone Nazi, apparently. But it's very important that this radical opposition to Putin, despite the cap on their support in the population, let's call it 20-25% max, they are going to evolve, they're going to consolidate, and they're going to develop greater autonomy. And Putin, during this year, will be increasingly forced to be responsive to them. And that's going to be kind of a back to a triangulation story that we had before the war, where Putin was arbitrating rather than leading his court. The war made him the leader again, yeah. But now this ownership of the leadership of the court is little by little slipping again, and he's becoming a referee again. And this whole war story is to some extent getting away from him. Outcome: Russia will suffer a catastrophic and disastrous defeat of historical proportions no matter what happens. So I guarantee that. That's a guaranteed outcome. Even if Russia has implausible military success, we do not expect Ukraine's independence to lapse. But even if Russia has extraordinary military success, this war will still be a catastrophe beyond economics. It'll be a political catastrophe for Russia. Ukraine will stand, and there is a degree of safety with which we can say that for the foreseeable future. But how far Ukraine will need to compromise, right, on its maximalist goals is something we're going to see this year. At the moment, the odds of compromise look very significant indeed, but that's dependent on the uncertainties of war, right? On the uncertainties of this sort of battle of wills that's been created, where the Putin regime just wants to outlast, knowing it can't win. The Putin regime wants to outlast Ukraine and outlast the West's commitment to Ukraine. But we're basically going to see what the uncertainties of this standoff lead to, and we're going to see about the sustenance and escalation of Western support within the parameters of sound nuclear escalation management. You can affect what Western governments do as Western citizens, but a stable measure of support for Ukraine, which I believe is justified on the grounds of our strategic interests in the West, will last for a year, maybe 2 years, and beyond that we are in uncertain territory. So that's where we are, beautiful humans. I think a version of something like this video deserves a place on the main channel, and it's only for health reasons that it's not there. However, at the moment I'm working on something quite special for the main channel. It's already been recorded, re-recorded after some glitches, and having looked at it, it's a bit taxing on your attention span, I think, but it will be the video that probably I'm personally most pleased with, even though the edit might not be that good. But in terms of the content, it'll be the video I'm most pleased with, that really allows us to come to terms with all that we've been talking about over the last few months about this brutal invasion of Ukraine in a slightly different way. All my love to you. Today we can rightly say Slava Ukraini, and Talk to you very soon.